So welcome everyone who's coming from the last presentation. We'll just give folks a couple more minutes if you need to go to the bathroom or grab a drink of water or attend to your children. I know the last presentation ran a little late, but it was a good conversation. And then to our panelists, actually, some of the questions from last session were about increased anxiety during this time, or the fear, increased fear and fear of death. So I'm assuming there'll be more questions about mental health and how parents can be allies and advocates, but those are a couple of things from the last session that came up.
Okay, great.
And I am going to step away for 1 second to take care of my dog. All right, thank you for that. My dog overate, and so yesterday, and so he's been a little sick and just got into something that he shouldn't have. But thank you for joining us for part 2 of our Parenting in the Time of COVID workshop. This day is focused on mental health, and we heard from a licensed marriage and family therapist in the first session who talked about our emotional family bank account and ways to respond to bids. And then now we're going to shift a little bit and hear from NAMI San Francisco and their presentation entitled Parents as Allies and Advocates, continuing on this conversation about mental health in this time. So I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Great. Thank you so much, Tressa. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. So we're from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization that provides advocacy, education, support, and public awareness so that individuals and families affected by mental health conditions can build better lives. No, that's a mouthful. NAMI SF is one of hundreds of affiliates across the country that is working to end mental health stigma and support those in need. And our programs are presented by trained volunteers like us who have the personal experience of living with a mental health condition or caring for a loved one with a mental health condition. First, I'd like to introduce myself and my co-speaker. I'm Stephanie Hoffman. I work as a content marketing manager at a data company called Splunk. I'm a former member of the board of directors for the San Francisco chapter of NAMI. But through many different programs, I speak at high schools, universities, corporations, through various programs. I've taught a NAMI Basics class, which is a class for parents of children with a mental health condition on how to navigate all aspects of their child's illness. I've given nationally syndicated video presentations. I write about mental illness, and some of my writings have appeared in KQED, Elephant Journal, and the NAMI Advocate. And I also have a blog, and I recently started an employee resource group, or an ERG, at my company on neurodiversity, which has grown to around 465 members and counting. And when I'm not speaking or advocating or writing, I'm a salsa dancer. So I'm dancing or traveling, or I'm also a wine lover. And I like to hike and kayak as well and spend time with friends and family. So that's that's me. Mark?
Hi, so I'm Mark David. I I do work for NAMI as well. I do mostly presentation stuff. I also like edit videos and do website work. And a little bit about myself. I am the uncle of three wonderful children. You might actually see one of them running here to bother me from time. And I love messing with technology. So I love building computers. I love messing with phones. I love programming. So I love all things tech. So yeah, a little bit more about the presentation. Please keep in mind that we are not mental health experts. We're not medical experts. We are just speaking from our own experience. I myself live with schizoaffective disorder and depression. So me and Stephanie will be talking about our experiences with mental health conditions and living with them. Also, feel free to write questions in the Q&A. We will answer as many of them as we can at the end. And throughout the presentation, please, we encourage you to write questions. If there's a certain thing that speaks out to you about, or even share kind of your experiences with mental health and mental health conditions, you're more than welcome to. Back to you, Stephanie.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Mark. And one thing I did forget to mention, I actually am the parent of a wonderful girl. Actually, she's grown up now. Who did experience, suffer and struggle with mental health issues for a long time, especially when she was an early teenager. So the stories I'll be talking about will be our journey and how I cared for her as a parent. So we'll dive right in. Let's start with a basic question. What is mental health? Mental health is the way we think and how we relate to others. And just like gender, race, and other types of diversity, there's diversity in mental health since our brains all function differently. We exist on a mental health continuum, but our position on the spectrum can evolve and change as a result of a range of factors and as our bodies mature and experience and the environment around us changes. So one of the questions we get asked the most is what factors contribute to someone developing a mental health condition? A mental health condition isn't the result of one event, and more importantly, it is no one's fault. Research suggests multiple linking causes, including biological factors, such as genes or brain chemistry, life experiences, such as trauma or abuse, family history of mental health problems, environmental stressors, such as social media, academic stress, or bullying, and currently COVID-19, which has significantly affected youth, increasing rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, and suicidal behavior since the pandemic. So even without a pandemic, mental health conditions in youth are very common, with 1 in 5 youth ages 3 to 18 living with a mental health condition. Within this statistic, 11% of youth have a mood disorder, which means that their mood is distorted or inconsistent with their circumstances and interferes with their ability to function. 10% of youth are diagnosed with a behavior or conduct disorder that negatively affects how they behave and interact with others. And 8% of youth are diagnosed with anxiety disorders, although that number has risen precipitously with the pandemic, as we mentioned before. So mental health conditions are also prevalent in younger children. According to the CDC, ADHD, behavior problems, anxiety, and depression are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders in children. Around 7% of children aged 3 to 17 years have a diagnosed behavior problem. Around 7% of children aged 3 to 17 also have diagnosed anxiety, and a little more than 3% of children aged 3 to 17 have diagnosed depression. Now, we're not focusing on diagnoses today. We are going to concentrate on the challenges mental health conditions create for youth and how parents become allies and advocates for our kids and families. We will, however, provide a link to a handout at the end with descriptions of some of the more common youth mental health conditions. So the promising news is that treatment success rates are very high for mental health conditions that are diagnosed and treated. But tragically, up to 50% of children 8 to 15 don't receive treatment. and the average delay between the onset of symptoms and treatment is 10 years. The impact of not receiving treatment is significant. It's important to note that 50% of all mental health conditions start by the age of 14 and 75% start by the age of 24. 50% of students 14 or older with a mental health condition drop out of high school, and approximately 70% of youth and juvenile justice systems live with a mental health condition. The impact of mental illness on diverse communities is even more extreme. LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than heterosexual youth. 31% of white children and youth receive mental health services compared to 13% of children of color. When mental health issues are identified, African American youth tend to be labeled with more severe diagnoses and are hospitalized at rates 2 to 3 times that of white youth, suggesting a lack of preventative and early intervention services. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our own stories now, and I'll let my co-speaker go first. How did your mental health condition develop?
Okay, so at an early age, so I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, but that diagnosis came in later. But the groundwork was already actually there, and the signs were actually there since I was very young. When I was a kid, I tended to isolate a lot. I would rather not play with anybody. I'd rather go read or play with my action figures out in like the playground. I'd read comic books just by myself, or I would just straight up pretend like I'm like a pirate playing on a thing by myself. But that wasn't really a worry to me or to other people. But then things started happening where, you know, I would cry just out of nowhere. I would, act sporadically. Like a thing that was bothersome in school was actually, I like little did anyone know I had ADHD and I couldn't really sit still or pay attention much. And yeah, so those things kind of grew and grew and grew. Like in middle school, I was officially diagnosed with ADHD, and later in high school, I was diagnosed schizoaffective because I was also having symptoms of schizophrenia, and and so the diagnosis just pretty much they just added on to over time. They didn't really like manifest anything, but a lot of it really did come from you know my childhood, where I didn't have the best childhood because being bullied at school and at home. Like my mother was off at work whenever I came home and my dad was there, and he wasn't really the most gentle guy. He wasn't really the best father figure. So it all really did stem from there. And throughout my life, my diagnosis really did affect kind of the way I live, just because the depression part really did hinder me doing normal things. Like I wouldn't wake up in the morning, or like I do wake up in the morning, but I'd rather just stay in bed. I had no motivation. Literally everything I said was very like depressing. It was very sad, and this really did start in like when I was like 5 or 4 years old. And in COVID-19, like overall, I'm doing a lot better. I have everything under control. I have a lot of coping techniques. I have medication. I have a program I'm in. But the whole COVID-19 situation really did and is affecting my mental health condition a lot, mainly because my main kind of coping mechanism is to go on walks, go to a local coffee shop and just chill out there, read a book, go on my computer, people watch. And it's a bit harder now. Like I would also go out with friends and just hang out, just like uh, get some coffee, watch a movie, go hang around that stuff. But yeah, it's just been really hard to just connect with all my friends. That's really my main coping mechanism, is to go out and just seize the day. So yeah, you Stephanie, like how's your daughter's condition, like how did it first come up and how did it kind of progress throughout the years?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for sharing, Mark. That was very powerful and insightful. So like I mentioned, I'm the mother of a wonderful daughter. And I first started seeing signs that she was experiencing mental illness when she was maybe around 11. And I saw her exhibit behaviors like extreme irrational anger, slamming doors, withdrawing. She would also isolate and really withdraw from me, and shut herself in a room. And she always seemed to be angry. And she would scream, "I hate you," and slam doors when I asked her to do her homework. And just she would shut down and didn't want to talk to me. She also couldn't stay still and would be very fragmented. And we did get her diagnosis of early on of ADHD. But then as her behaviors progressed, she would get into fights at school, her grades fell, and she really started engaging in risky behaviors. And there just always seemed to be a lot of drama around her. And as a parent, I was just so confused. I remembered what my daughter used to be like, and at times I saw these glimpses, but I was just really heartbroken and sad, and I missed who she was. I wanted to help her, and yet when she'd yell at me, especially after I was trying so hard to help her, I would just bristle. I would not be a good communicator. I'd yell back, and I'd shut down also. And basically we couldn't understand each other and we couldn't really connect. I put her into therapy, but therapists would tell me that this behavior was attributed to a lot of reasons, like the divorce or just, early kind of preteen angst. But it was actually amazing how many people, including people in the therapy community at the time, would attribute her behavior to anything other than mental illness, and really tried to normalize what was, abnormal behavior. And I knew something was wrong, but I just began to question myself. Maybe I was the one who was overreacting. As her behavior progressed, I did put her into a psychological evaluation at UCSF. But as her behavior became more and more out of control, until eventually she ended up breaking the law as a minor and was sent to a long-term residential mental health boarding school for all 4 years of her high school career. And that really, really helped. Saved her. It really gave her the help and the treatment and the support that she needed for years. And during that time, she did get diagnosed, with many things, but borderline, also bipolar, manic depressive. But now, years later, she's a young adult, and she is successfully managing her illness. She has a job she loves. She herself is a mom, and she's doing fantastic. So that was our. But for a long time, it was a very rocky road, with lots of ups and downs. And I didn't have the foresight to know that we would come out of it. So I'm. So one of the best things you can do to support your child is to become their mental health ally. Whether they have been diagnosed with a condition or not, all kids need mental health support, and you are the perfect person to provide it since you know them best. And although assuming the role of becoming your child's mental health ally may seem daunting, there are 3 steps you can start with that will help lead you through. Learn the warning signs and supports. Reach out and listen without judgment. And then finally, connect with empathy. And we'll talk a little bit more to those points throughout the presentation. So step 1 in becoming an ally is to educate yourself on the warning signs. And let's look at a list of the most common signs to look for. Feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks. Severe out of control or risk-taking behaviors that cause harm. Sudden overwhelming fear for no reason, sometimes with a racing heart or physical discomfort. Seeing, hearing, or believing things that aren't real. Drastic changes in mood, behavior, or sleeping habits. Extreme difficulty concentrating that causes school failure. Intense worries or fears that get in the way of daily activities. Throwing up, or using laxatives, or not eating. Significant weight loss or gain. Using alcohol or drugs excessively. And trying to harm oneself or making plans to attempt suicide. I know this is a very kind of long and list, but Mark, do you, I was wondering if you could speak to any of these, or ones that you particularly experienced in your journey.
Yeah, so strangely enough, a lot of these tick the box for me, but at an early age, probably feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks, and extreme difficulty concentrating that causes school failure really just speak out to my early years. Feeling very sad and withdrawn. I never like I I would rather not go to school and just stay in bed and just cry all day. And extreme difficulty concentrating that causes school failure. I had ADD. It was really hard for me to just concentrate on the work. I was doodling. I was like playing with my fingers. I was doing all these different things. I was just like moving around. So yeah, those two really do speak out to me in my younger days.
Great, thank you so much. So as you have just learned, there are a variety of warning signs to look for. And I'm not suggesting what we're about to tell you is how you diagnose, which is clearly should be left to a professional. But these are a few things to keep in mind when you're gauging whether to take them to a professional for further assessment. It's also important to note that one or two of these signs may not indicate a mental health condition. So it's important to think about things like the intensity, meaning how severe are the symptoms? Duration, meaning how long do they last? Is it fleeting or prolonged for days or weeks? And the level of distress, meaning how much do the signs impair daily functioning? What distinguishes normal teenage behavior from the possibility of a mental health condition? As parents, we know that teenagers can exhibit a lot of behaviors that are congruent with mental illness, and their hormones and bodies are changing, and they can be moody or emotional or even experience depression or highs and lows. So it's really hard to, with youth to distinguish typical behavior from really concerning behavior. So like, for example, when I told my daughter to do her homework, she would scream at me and slam doors. And that didn't happen just once. It happened all the time, not just once or twice. When she would isolate, it wouldn't be just for a day or two. It would be for weeks at a time. She didn't want to talk to anybody. She'd stay in her room. And also her struggles really impaired her friendships. She was always alienating her friends or getting in fights, and they hurt her schoolwork, and her grades really dropped. So things like this that might indicate something that would warrant attention or would warrant further examination is these, the extreme nature of these behaviors or duration. So now that we know how prevalent mental health conditions are and what to look for, it is important to think about how we respond to our child's mental health needs. And often our backgrounds and own history have an impact on our responses. And Mark and I will talk now about how our family's responses affected our journeys. So first, I'll let my co-speaker Mark take the stage.
Hello, I'm back. My family comes from the Philippines. Actually, I was born in the Philippines and immigrated here when I was like super young, like 2 or 3 years old. So that kind of shows, or that kind of tells you, my parents grew up in the Philippines and were basically were raised there. Not so. Growing up, I always had these stories and always had these like thoughts going on in my head from them telling me like, oh, mental health and mental health conditions are, a bad thing, you're crazy, because uh there was moments where we would talk about certain family members who obviously had a mental health condition, but we laughed about them, we joked around, we made fun of them, and also had these little fidgets. Like I would always shake my leg. I couldn't stand still. I would, whenever we went on a family like dinner night, I would be in the corner reading a comic book rather than like engaging the family. And my dad really did kind of villainize those actions. Like he said, oh, if you shake your leg too much, that means there's something wrong with your brain, or if you don't talk, something wrong. So just having like one of my parents, especially my father, kind of you know, villainize certain attributes of mine, really didn't help. And then having the of, oh, if you do have a mental health condition, that means you're crazy or there's something wrong with you. And my mom wasn't as aggressive with it, but she was very passive about it. Like she didn't really interfere. She didn't really know what to do, and that really did stem from the Philippines not really being up to par, or like not being up to date on what mental health conditions are. In my opinion, like we're still playing catch up in the Philippines, and throughout my journey, it was so ingrained in me that even when I was growing up, I was diagnosed and I'm getting all this treatment. It was hard to shake all of that was kind of instilled in me at a young age. Uh, so, I mean, I eventually got over it, and I accept who I am, and I know it's not a bad thing. but still it was a difficult thing to kind of get over. And the and I wish that my parents really I wish that at least my dad wasn't so aggressive with what he was saying and villainizing. Like, I would have been okay if he took my mom's route and just stayed silent, didn't really do anything about it, like, or like didn't really pay attention to it as much, because at least he wasn't doing any more damage than there already was. And an advice that I would give to parents going forward is exactly that. Like, if your kid has this kind of like this certain trait about them that seems kind of off, I encourage you guys, please do not villainize any of these like small little traits, because like it affected me so much, and it's a hard thing to shake. But Stephanie, I'm kind of curious, what was kind of your mindset with seeing the warning signs, maybe even seeing your daughter getting diagnosed? What's your perspective on this whole mental health journey from the parent perspective?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So me, my personally, I mean, of course, at first, you don't want to believe it. You don't want to, you don't want your child to struggle with a mental illness. But I think once I really started seeing signs, I was very quick to embrace that she needed help, and I needed to get her help. Um, so when she was first exhibiting symptoms of a mental health condition, my own family was pretty confused. I think they blamed a lot of it on outside circumstances, or like the divorce and maybe the dynamic between her father and I. But even though even though they knew that she needed help, I think deep down they thought I could have avoided it, or that I could have done more. And I think they just they weren't aware, and they didn't know, and that's where kind of the stigma and ignorance plays in. Once, of course, I started advocating for her mental health, and once I got her into a mental health boarding school, and they were very supportive. But still, some of their comments early on really did stay with me. It really made me question my ability as a parent and created a lot of self-doubt. Now, of course, 10 years later, with all my mental health activism, my mom is fully on board and understands a lot more about mental health illness, about mental health. She's just very open to a lot more. But like I said, I really think it comes down to education and eradicating ignorance and stigma. And as far as advice for other parents, I'd say trust your gut. You know your child better than anybody. And if you feel there's something wrong, or that something's off, or that they're they're troubled, or they're struggling, get it checked out. Chances are you're probably right. And as with anything else, also, everyone will have an opinion. A lot of people will weigh in whether they know what they're talking about or not. And it's really hard, but try not to pay attention to the negativity. Really kind of cut out those deceit who tear you down. Find a group of people who can really support you, uplift you, and validate you. So, which is actually a great segue into our next slide, which is starting the conversation. Opening lines of communication and starting the conversation with your child is really a critical step in becoming an ally. And it's helpful to use open-ended questions that do not elicit a yes or no answer, but invite your child to talk about how they're feeling, such as, can you tell me a little bit more about how you're feeling? Or tell me about what's happening or what's going on? Or maybe if I understand better, we can find a solution together. And your child may not feel comfortable opening up to you about what is going on at first. So you can also ask if there is someone else they would like to talk to. Or ask maybe in a different way, or at a different time, and they might find ways to open up. So along the lines of conversation, here's a list of do's and don'ts that we have found helpful. So first we'll start with the ways that are effective in communicating. Listen without judgment. This means putting aside all your advice and just trying to understand your child. And you don't have to be a problem solver, and you don't have to have all the answers right away, but often your child just wants to be heard. Validate your child and respond in ways that show that you see and hear your child. So as we mentioned on the last slide, saying things like, that must have been a terrible experience, or that must make you feel really afraid. Ask questions. Be curious about what they're experiencing. Say things like, how does that make you feel? Or can you tell me a little bit more about what's going on for you? I know that if I had asked those questions early on when my daughter was struggling in crisis, I think she would have had a lot to say, and she said as much. Praise your child's strengths. Chances are they're feeling afraid or unworthy or are experiencing really low self-esteem, especially if they're struggling with these, with a mental health condition. And show them that you see all the wonderful things about them and that this illness or condition doesn't define them or diminish their strengths. And then, of course, reassure them that you love them and are there for them. And often a mental health condition brings up an array of emotions. Having a mental health condition sometimes makes you feel like no one loves you or you're unlovable. And even if they know that you love them, it never hurts to show them that you're going to be there for them for the long haul. And it helps to know that they can't do anything to lose your love. And so similarly, there are ways of communicating that are not as effective. So some of these are accusations, things like, oh, you're just going to skip school again, aren't you? Or you're just going to do, this or that. Obviously, that's going to put them on the defensive. Making you statements, you always do this, you always do that. That's never really an effective way of communicating. Letting emotions get the best of you or losing control. That's not communication. Often I know with my daughter, when I would get angry and not really be able to communicate effectively, and I'd yell back. And that would just polarize us more. It would just separate us more, and I'd have to work harder to actually communicate with her and reach her. Things like pity, like, oh, you poor thing. Chances are your child is feeling bad already, and that can sometimes seem insincere. And of course, platitudes, saying things like, I understand when you don't understand. It can seem like you're blowing them off or that you're just not hearing them. So connecting with empathy is a skill not all parents, including myself, were born with. And often we're so intent on fixing the problem that we forget to sit back and just provide comfort and understanding, an understanding ear during hard times. So let's watch while Brene Brown, a leading psychologist, talks us through listening with empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Oh, I love that video. So speaking about connection, we're going to talk about advocating for your child. Advocate for your child's healthcare needs and help them connect with resources. So important. Advocate for yourself and your family. That means prioritizing your own mental health and finding support for other family members, and attending family support groups. And advocating for more mental health supports and education in your community. So your pediatrician is a great place to start if you think something might be wrong, or something, your child might be experiencing a mental health condition. And if you're an advocate for your child's healthcare, and it's important to get educated, get organized, and ask your providers for what you and your child need. So educate yourself, build your confidence so you can ask questions and advocate. And that means using the communication strategies we talked about earlier to talk to your child and what they are experiencing, and gather information from school and other places and people your child spends time with. Share your concerns, include reports from school staff and what you've seen at home. And to make this an easier process, keep a log or file of all your concerns and efforts, including conversations with practitioners, visits, results, and medications. And prepare your concerns and questions prior to the appointment, since visits can be short. Ask for referrals to specialists. Go with your gut. If you are concerned about specific things or have thoughts about what might help, remember that you know your child the best, and ask, as I mentioned before, and ask the specialist that you think what you think might help. And ask if a mental health assessment is needed, preferably by a specialist with experience in children's mental health. And remember, you do have a voice in your child's mental health care. You have a very important voice in your child's mental health care. Speaking about partnering, it's also important to partner with your child's school by doing the following. Share your concerns with staff, including possibly teachers, health staff, and/or other administrative staff. Ask what teachers see in school. Refer to academic indicators, things like grades, if they've gone up and down, attendance records, level of engagement in activities. Ask about classroom adjustments, things like sitting, seat placement, or any kind of homework, adjustments. There's special education, 504 plan, and an IEP, and you can learn more about the differences between these and process at support for families of children with disabilities. And we'll put a link in the chat. And it's important to remember that mental health conditions affect the whole family. So it is important to advocate for supports for yourself and your family, as well as the child that is living with a mental health condition. So for you, prioritize self-care. When my daughter was going through various crises, I could call friends, I go on long runs. Like I said, I'm a salsa dancer, so when I could, I go dancing. And that really helped me be present and sane, and really gave me great outlets. Make sure other family members receive support. NAMI has a range of support groups for family members and education opportunities that we'll mention in a bit. And seek support from your communities and connect. And you can connect through NAMI support groups, workshops, and events. And the really great news for all of us is that there are lots of help available, and there's great hope for kids living with mental health conditions. Diagnosing conditions early and navigating the system to find resources and support are key to this journey. Now, Mark and I will talk about what we found most helpful in our mental health journeys. Mark?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So overall, me and my family were actually doing a lot better, especially with me and my condition. There used to be a time where I was in and out of the hospital like every other. It was pretty wild. But now, I go there like once a year, like one time, like once every 2 years. Like that's pretty good. And I think this whole kind of journey through my mental health and working through my mental health condition really did help my, like, kind of save my family from falling apart completely. Like, we're all open about mental health, and we all acknowledge that we all have mental health, so we're all just open about it. Like, we tell each other, I'm taking a mental health day, or oh, that kind of increased my anxiety, so can you not do that? Or for my sake, can you please keep the house clean? It calms down my worries. So we're all kind of open about that stuff. But personally, for me, what helps my mental health what helps me in my mental health is primarily just just talking to people. My biggest thing is communication. Like I do take medication, I do go to therapists, I talk to doctors, but overall the thing that keeps me like thriving in life is just talking to my friends, talking to my family, enjoying the day with my sister's kids, or just playing video games with my friends at like 3 a.m. in the morning. Just like overall just enjoying life with the people, with what makes life matters, is what gives me meaning. And I'm not really looking forward to anything uh in my life. Like a lot of people ask me like, "Oh, what are you looking forward to?" In honesty, I'm just taking it one step at a time. And I don't know what's going to happen like next week. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's going to happen the next hour, but if it's something good, great. If it's something bad, it's going to be a really great story. I'm just excited for what life has to give me. I'm making no plans, but I'm just enjoying it one day at a time. But how about you, Steph? What's kind of what's kind of helped you and your family through this situation?
Yeah, so for my own mental health, I think as I mentioned, especially this past year, I've made it a point to do Zumba workouts, running and hiking, done a lot of hiking, even if I can't go social dancing, especially these days. I have a kayak, and so at the beginning of this summer, I've been kayaking with friends, which has been really great. Things like meditation and breathing exercises have also been very helpful when I felt myself go down a dark road, or I felt my heart rate increase, my chest close up. And then finally, speaking about my experiences and helping others, and advocating has really been critical in my healing, from everything my daughter and I went through years ago. I recently spoke at the NAMI California conference in October, and I was presenting with my daughter, actually. And she's doing great. Like I mentioned, she's a job she loves. She's a mom, she's just flourishing, and she's really, really managing her illness. And now she's in a position to help others. So that's been really healing, knowing that we are helping others together. And so now the great news is that you are now ahead of the curve in educating yourself on how prevalent mental health conditions are in youth, what to look for, how to become a mental health ally for your child, and how to advocate for resources. Besides this presentation, NAMI San Francisco offers a wide range of supports for families and youth who are facing mental health challenges. And some of these include family support groups, which are in English, Cantonese, and Spanish, and that are currently running virtually, where you can share your experiences, and connect and ask for advice and resources, or just listen and learn from the experience of other parents. NAMI Basics, as I mentioned, I taught. It's a 6-week workshop that teaches parents of how to navigate systems and help for their children and their families when their child has a mental health condition. NAMI Family to Family, it's an 8-week workshop for family members or loved ones of an adult living with a mental health condition, or to help understand conditions and find resources and support. NAMI SF Mental Health Resource Guide for youth and their families, which includes a range of resources in San Francisco for youth and families, from support groups to education services and hotlines. And the NAMI SF resource line, which is 415-237-0039. And someone will respond within 24 hours to refer you to resources and supports. Now, you can help advocate for education throughout communities across the Bay Area, and to share critical mental health information and promote understanding and care. And NAMI SF offers a range of stigma reduction and education presentations like this one, including, and some of the other ones are, ending the stigma for students. And you can ask for this presentation for students in your child's middle or high school. Mental Health 101, Speaking Our Minds, and that's for any community organizations, including religious orgs and community centers. Mental Health Matters at Work, and that's dedicated to the workplace. In Our Own Voice, that's for those with a foundational understanding of mental health, but interested in hearing peer stories, like the ones Mark and I were sharing. And you can request these presentations for your schools, communities, and workplaces, so that together we can start the conversation around mental health and the stigma, and help people get the resources they need. So with that, that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and please visit namisf.org for more information and resources. And we're happy to open up to questions now.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to ask a question, they can type it in the chat box or the Q&A function. And we'll just give it a moment to see if anyone has any questions. But thank you, Stephanie and Mark, for sharing your personal journeys and helping us open up this conversation here at St. Ignatius.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, Stephanie, I actually have a question from a parent perspective. I had an IEP in high school, and I absolutely hated it, but my mom really wanted me to. What's kind of your take on uh, putting your kid through a very heavily supported educational system?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually did not get an IEP for my daughter when she was struggling because she was just at the beginning of high school.
Yeah,
Um,
I was talking about like the residential school, was it?
with her. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great experience. So she was a long-term residential mental health boarding school. It was in northern Arizona, and she was actually sent there by the juvenile justice system. That said, she was there 4 years. It was an incredible, very structured. She, they had, it was an accredited school, and they had both online and in-person classroom learning. They had an equestrian program, and they had rodeo every year. They marched in parades. They had volunteer opportunities. They did they did Rotary, intramural sports. So she was in volleyball and softball. But most importantly, it had a very structured therapy program. So they were in individual therapy twice a week and group therapy 3 times a week. And that really, plus they had a lot of professionals around, and all the girls had a lot of professionals around them all the time. So dorm counselors, psychiatrists who would prescribe medications, therapists, and they really started to gain a lot of tools to communicate, and really effective kind of therapy treatments that not just help them for whatever they were experiencing as children, but help them in their adult life as well.
And also, I see there's a chat from someone for you, Stephanie.
Oh, okay. So why, after the time your daughter was in therapy, do you think therapists overlooked or did not diagnose mental illness? Okay, so good question. So after the time your daughter was in therapy, do you think the therapist overlooked or did not diagnose mental illness? Any thoughts as to how to advocate if therapy is not working? Yeah, that's a really excellent question. With me, I knew so little about it at the time. This was 10 years ago, and it was really kind of trial and error. And I took her to several therapists at first. And the first ones I took her to were just kind of regular therapists. I mean, they weren't, they didn't have a specialty. Had I known a little bit more about her condition, I would have looked for more specialized therapists like dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy. But I took her to regular therapists. And I think even at that, even though it was just 10 years ago, there was still so much stigma around, mental illness that even therapists were reluctant to really diagnose. And just maybe just not aware. I mean, it wasn't, and maybe, there was also a self-censorship on their part. Maybe they didn't know how I would react, or if that would be met with, defensiveness or anything. So I think there was just a lot of misunderstanding. But when I realized the therapy wasn't effective, I mean, eventually I did pull her out and put her into other therapies that I thought were more effective. And I think this is a good principle in general. I think we get locked into, we commit to a therapist and we think, oh, I have to stay with this person, and you don't. It's really about finding the right fit. It's like anything else. So if it doesn't feel like the right fit, or if you feel like this person isn't really seeing your child, like I said before in the presentation, you're the parent, you know your child better than anybody. You have that connection to your child. Feel free to shop around, and until you find somebody who really listens, really meets your needs, and really helps you get effective treatment. And I would encourage that. It usually doesn't stop with the first one. You have to look sometimes, and that's can be really frustrating and can be really tiring, but I would just encourage you to just keep an open mind and really, look around until you find somebody who really fits.
Also, there's another question from Lisa. How did you navigate the space between your daughters trying to normalize behavior and them finding her help? Like, how did you finally get the therapist to recognize that the behavior wasn't normal?
When I get the space for your daughter's therapy to normalize behavior. Yeah. Yeah, good question. That's kind of an extension of what I was, kind of talking about previously. It was one particular therapist. We stayed with her probably even for too long, but I could tell that the treatment wasn't effective. Sh- we'd alternate. She would go into the therapist, alone for one session, and then we'd do it as mother and daughter in the next session. So we kind of alternate. But and every time we'd come away, we would actually be more angry at each other than when we left. And at first I thought, okay, this is just part of the process. But then I'm like, hey, wait a minute, this is not, we shouldn't, we should be at least communicating better. Even if all the problems aren't solved, we should at least be communicating better. And things were actually getting worse. And so it didn't, I can't remember how long we actually stayed, probably, like I said, maybe a couple months, but eventually I'm like, this doesn't feel good. And it's not making us connect. And I think really, these very kind of simple, markers. And granted, not every therapy session is easy. A lot of times, a lot of stuff comes up and it's challenging. But when every session, things don't get better and or communication is getting worse, I think that's just a really good sign that this is not an effective, this treatment or this therapist is not effective, is not a good fit. And she actually is, yeah, it's so funny when I was trying to communicate to her that my daughter does have mental health, that I really felt strongly that she did have a mental health condition and she was struggling. And, one of our sessions, I think the turning point was one of the therapists said that my daughter was angry because I took her to a museum that she didn't want to go to. And I'm like, okay, all right, that's that's it. So it differs for everybody. But I would say, like, if continually communication is getting worse, it's not effective. That the therapist isn't really understanding what's going on. So.
Someone just talked a little bit about kind of their experience with their kid going back to school. Like I'm guessing actual physical school, not online. Yeah, it's a lot. And for me, I kind of read a little bit into it. Unfortunately, I have nothing much to say because my niece and my nephews, luckily their school districts offer like either online or physical classes. And my sister's super paranoid, so she actually told them like, "Oh, you're going to online school for now, just so that just until this whole thing blows over." So I don't really have much to say on your end, but like good for your kid that he's learning a lot about like this whole situation and he's not being sheltered. So props to your kid and props to you for teaching him or her. I don't
Yeah, that's a challenging one as well, and I think it differs for every parent. I think maybe from my perspective, as a child gets older, maybe, as they become older, grade school or even middle school, they will have more understanding. So maybe kind of talking to them, at their level about what the risks are, or maybe, giving them understanding because they'll know. Kids are so smart. And I think as they get older and become more aware, they're going to hear a lot of information from a lot of different sources, from their friends. And I think it's probably best if information comes from you. So, not that you can necessarily compete what they hear with what they hear from other sources, but as long as they're really able to understand, and you can only gauge your child, kind of gauge, where they are in that. If they're younger, it kind of might be, more effective to yeah, to be reassuring. I think reassuring and, throughout all stages is never hurts. But as they get older, they can understand more. So. Great questions. And of course, if, after our presentation, if anybody has questions, you can feel free to ping us or ping Natasha, and we can answer those as well.
Well, great. If there's no more questions, thank you both for presenting again and responding to our questions and sharing your personal stories. And thank you to our attendees for engaging in these conversations about mental health, especially during this time. This conversation has been recorded, so we'll share it out with you probably next week or maybe after our second session or second set of workshops, which is next weekend. And we're going to be talking about how to create liturgy at home and also connecting to the wider community, even though we have to stay in place for a large part of our days. Do any of our panelists have any final word or last bits of information about how to connect to NAMI?
For me, just check the website. We have a lot of information there for like groups, so like finding other resources, even getting a public presentation, so that type of thing. But everybody else, yeah, probably got something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that too. Our website, yeah, has all the information that we just shared with you is on our website as well. So that would be a great place to start. And then, of course, feel free to reach out to us at NAMI SF, to Natasha, and we're happy to point you in the right direction.
Yep, I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody's interested in any of the presentations or anything. And we want to thank you again for hosting us, Teresa, and coordinating all of this. It's been great to be able to have the time to present to you. And thanks for taking an hour on your Sunday.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.